Good evening, viewers, and welcome to the very first episode of The Conversation. Like other places in the Caribbean, Belize is known to be a laid-back culture. That easygoing spirit forms a part of our identity and influences the way we react to national issues, the way we speak of them, and the degree of vigor we invest in our causes, in most instances. Topics of enormous importance are whispered about, and sensitive generational issues are sometimes avoided altogether. This approach is not necessarily the best and does not foster positive change. Things change when we speak up, mobilize, and take action to solve our issues. Inclusive, sustained discourse is important, and we are offering this platform to nurture just that, the conversation. The conversation is here to stimulate wide and diverse discussions on the many topics that are of national importance. This nationally televised show will dive into many issues and will not shy away from the truly sensitive ones we have avoided for far too long. I am your host, Carla Barnett. We kick off this first episode dealing with a topic that has disproportionately affected women and girls in our society: cyberbullying. What is cyberbullying? Cyberbullying is bullying that takes place over digital devices like cell phones, computers, and tablets. Cyberbullying includes in sending positive or posting negative, harmful, false, or mean content about someone else. It can include sharing personal or private information about someone else, causing embarrassment or humiliation. Some cyberbullying crosses the line into unlawful or criminal behavior. If you have ever been a victim of cyberbullying or know of someone who has, you know that it can be devastating and disrupting to your life. That is why tonight we are most grateful to have as our very first guest someone who has been a victim and who is willing to share her story with us. I welcome Chantel Magdalena to the conversation. Thanks for joining us. Good evening, Chantel. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with cyberbullying?
Hi, Ms. Carla. Good evening. It's a pleasure for me to be your first guest tonight. So my story, 13 years ago, I was a victim of the new cyberbullying in Belize. It wasn't popular. They had a website called Belizean Babes, and I shared some very intimate picture with my partner then. And after the breakup, he decided that he would share my pictures. I was a new teacher. I was fresh out of teaching, and those pictures disrupted my entire life. They were shared, they were emailed to my management. My pictures were printed and they were sticked around Belmopan. I was young, I was 23. It wasn't something that was popular in Belize, and it sent me into a deep depression. I had problems on my job. I locked up myself in the house. I was teaching and I was also a student at the University of Belize, and I stayed away from school for almost a month. Was an honor roll Dean's List student, and I was all alone. My family was not here, they were away in the States, so I was the only one in Belize. Very devastated time in my life.
And Chantel, I know because you and I have spoken about this before, that the effect on you was really very devastating. How did you manage the negative publicity? How did you deal with the emotional turmoil? What kind of support were you able to get to help you to get through this experience?
One thing I will always be grateful for is that I have a very, very supportive family. And not only my family, but I have a village that I always have support that I can turn to when I'm going through anything. I had my best friend, Kalila Enriquez.
Right.
My best friend was my biggest support. And not only being emotionally supportive to me, but she was one of the first person in Belize who made cyberbullying and these nude pictures a conversation, because she was working on the radio at that time. And my childhood friend Natalia and one of my cousins, Aretha Flores, they were
Good.
there's no way I can ever repay them for the support that they gave me during that time. I almost committed suicide.
Oh my. Can you share with us then what the most difficult part of that experience was for you? I know that having your friends around you was important in getting it behind you, but as you went through it, what was the most difficult thing you had to deal with? What was hardest for you?
Because I was teaching with a church state institution, I believed that they were my judge and my jury, and I didn't get the support that I needed from them. And that was the hardest thing, because I am a teacher and I am passionate about my career, and my career got interrupted because I didn't get the support that I needed from the management that I was teaching. Okay. They transferred me to another school, and I was fresh in my career, so I really didn't know what was the process and what I needed to do. So they forced me to resign, and I had broken service in my career because of that. My mother wasn't here, who is one of my biggest support, and I really was lost. It was like I was living one day at a time, but as a zombie, because I didn't know what was going to happen yet. And I live in a small community where I live in Belmopan, everybody knows everybody here. I'm very active in my community, and the people who I thought was going to support me, they didn't treat me as if I was a victim. They treated me as if I did that to myself. Okay. And it was very, very difficult.
I can see that, and I know how hard it was for you. You managed to rise above that situation, and I know your village, as you call them, were an important part of rising above it. Do you think that the situation is any different now for persons who may experience the same thing that you went through, the same cyberbullying? Is the situation any different? Is it better? Is it worse?
I think it has become better, because people are talking about it and they have more support. 13 years ago, the support that some of these young ladies are getting here now wasn't there for me, because it was a taboo in belief. Persons, even persons in my family who have experienced the same thing, but they didn't go through all that emotion that I went through, because it's not taboo anymore.
Okay, now we can talk about it, and talking about it helps, knowing that people are on your side and don't blame you for it happening, but understand that it is the perpetrator, in fact, who breaks a trust, who needs to be called into account. What advice do you have for persons who find themselves in a similar kind of position today? What advice would you give them?
It is very important to realize that your life hasn't stopped. And it's very important for you to have people around you, because no man is an island. I couldn't go through this alone. I needed support. I needed emotional support. And it's very important to also remember that you need to find that experience brought me closer to God, and it made me find a deep spiritual side of me that I didn't know that existed. And I guess because of all of that, it gave me the strength I needed to go on, and it gave me the strength to be successful, because that didn't hold me back.
Yes, and I know, Chantel, that you have not been kept back at all. And I know that even sharing this traumatic experience for you is difficult. But I want to commend you, first of all, for how you handled that crisis, how you rose above that malicious incident. I know that your life is in a much better place. You have a loving family around you. You have lovely children, and I want to commend you for being positive, keeping positive, and being an inspiration to everyone who knows your story. Thank you so very much for sharing that with us today.
And I also want to share with others that it won't go away, because every opportunity someone get, I have rised above all this, but they will always have people who will always make sure that they remind you that you went through this traumatic experience. But that is normal. That is human behavior. And
Right.
we cannot dwell on the negative, but always try to find a positive outcome with whatever experience you have gone through. I have a very supportive family, a very supportive husband, because I still remember when we started dating, this was the first thing that I told him, because I knew somebody would have made him know that what happened to me.
Right.
And he has accepted all of this. And he's very supportive even when things happen, because
Right.
they will always remind you of your past, and you can't get rid of your past. It will always be there. But I am in a very good place. I'm in peace, and I'm glad that I got this opportunity to share my story with Belize, because this was something that I always wanted to do. And yesterday I had to be there emotionally for somebody who was about to go through the same, something similar with an ex. And it felt good that I could have been her moral support through her traumatic incident yesterday.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chantel, for ending on that very positive note. You are a role model. I know I've told you this before in other circumstances, because you've been able to rise above what really is very traumatic for young girls going through these kinds of incidences. So thank you again for being with us tonight. It's been a pleasure to talk with you again.
You're welcome.
Viewers, you may not know that in October 2020, a Cybercrime Act was signed into law. We will pause for our first ad break now, and when we return, we will be joined by an attorney who will give us an overview of the Cybercrime Act. Please stay tuned. Good night and welcome back to The Conversation. I am your host, Carla Barnett. Tonight we are talking about cyberbullying that targets women and girls. In the first segment, we spoke with a victim of cyberbullying, and now I am joined by an attorney who will give us an overview of the Cybercrime Act, which was passed into law in October of 2020. Leslie Mendez is an attorney practicing law in Belize for over 7 years. She's a graduate of the University of the West Indies, the Norman Manley Law School in Jamaica, and the University of Notre Dame. Ms. Mendez also holds a master's in international human rights. The focus of Ms. Mendez's legal practice is constitutional and human rights, particularly prisoner rights, indigenous peoples' rights, women, refugee, and migrant rights, among others. Welcome, Leslie. It's a pleasure to have you here with me this evening. Before we get into cyberbullying specifically, can you help us to understand what are some of the offenses under this act? I think some people will be shocked to learn about some of the common practices that are illegal and for which a conviction can get someone jail time and fines from $3,000 and up. Can you tell us about those?
Yes, hi, sure. Thank you for having me on, first of all. I must say that I think it's very important that we're having this conversation, and it was very powerful and impactful to hear directly from somebody who has gone through something very traumatic and very common that happens in the cyber world, right?
Yes, it does.
With respect to, let's look at the Cybercrime Act. As you mentioned, there are offenses that have been created. I think it's about over 12 offenses that are now contained in the cybercrime legislation. I think some of the offenses, for instance, there is illegal theft, identity theft, and
Right.
illegal identity fraud. We would be somewhat familiar with these offenses, but the thing about the cybercrime legislation and what was so important about passing it, you will remember that it was passed also as a result of a lot of public outrage and push that we need to have cybercrime legislation.
Right.
What it is that these are offenses. Some of these offenses, I would say, we know of them in the non-cyber world already. But with the expansive use of technology, with the way that the internet has completely changed the way that we live and experience the world and interact with one another, it was bound for us to also now be expanding the criminal law and criminal sanctions to manage the way that we interact now in this other space that very much still forms part of our real world.
Yeah, absolutely. So for example, with identity theft, if you steal somebody's identity documents in hard copy, that's one crime. It's also a crime if you do so on the internet by pretending to be somebody and doing something in their name. That's what I'm understanding.
Exactly, and causing harm in the process.
Right.
And also probably benefiting from it when it comes to fraud, for instance.
Right.
We also now have under our criminal law, statutory law. Now we have what is commonly known as hacking.
Right.
There's also now this interference with other person's computer system without their consent and without lawful justification. That is something that is also covered under the legislation. We now have child luring. Child luring is very similar to child pornography, but now we have expanded it or adapted it now to also cover what happens in the cyber world, which is we know, and for a long time it has been happening, that we know a lot of older persons, a lot of adults have been using Facebook, have been using all of these social media to start to engage with children that are younger and very vulnerable.
Right.
And for instance, encouraging them to participate through this cyberspace as we now interact, now interact there, to also engage in sexual activity. So now child luring, which is another important offense that has been created.
Right, especially where adults would pretend to be children and get into their groups and encourage them to do things that they really are not supposed to be doing. Whether it's sexual activity, engaging with drugs and alcohol and those kinds of things that are against, the proper care for children. Yeah.
And also, it's always important to focus on the difference between the child, the adolescent, the teenager, right? The teenager might know that they are engaging with an adult, but it's not that they are necessarily tricked sometimes about the age, but the burden is on the adult. But the child, especially as a teenager, is very curious and is very much trying to come into their adulthood and personhood. And adults would know this, and they would sort of prey on this.
Right.
So this is something that's very common, and that we've known about it, especially it gets even worse when you're talking about the dark web. And so now we have specific legislation in Belize through the cybercrime legislation, which I only think will be expanded. I think that this is one of the first steps of Belize really grappling with managing.
Can we talk a little bit about Section 12, which encompasses specifically cyberbullying? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, well, Section 12 specifically deals, for instance, with the experience of Miss Magdaleno.
Right.
This one targets and addresses revenge porn, what we commonly refer to as revenge porn.
Right.
You will recall that this was one of the main things that the public was clamoring for the legislation to address.
Right.
And what it does is that it prohibits, it criminalizes the act of storing, the act of just capturing, the act of transmitting and sharing
Right.
From the images of another person's intimate areas, their private areas,
Right.
without their consent.
Right.
So it doesn't only mean you sharing it, for instance, through your Facebook post for all to see. It also includes me sending it in a private message to you, for instance, Ms.
Right,
Turner.
via WhatsApp, because I know a lot of it happens via WhatsApp nowadays, and people don't understand that that's illegal. It is illegal, and if it comes to you, you really ought not to be sharing it.
You ought not to be
Right.
sharing it. You perhaps should not destroy it immediately. What you should do is you should alert the authorities and then take direction
Right.
to the authorities.
Right.
Because it's also evidence that could be used, right? Like,
In
look,
court.
I got this, I
Right.
got this from this person, and that in itself is the criminal offense. You should not be sending me this, because I'm assuming also that it's you have been sharing this without the person's consent.
Right.
And so it's always good to
Right.
directly refer to the proper authorities and then take instructions from them, as opposed to
Right.
immediately deleting them. If you're
Right.
not gonna go down to then report it to the authorities, then delete it, right? But don't reshare it, because by resharing it, now you are now complicit and actually
Exactly. And that is the thing that people don't understand, that if those illicit images come to you and you pass it on to somebody else, you are also committing an illegal act and can be prosecuted for that.
And
Yes,
if you are keeping them, if you are keeping them stored, and
on
you
your
have not, and you have not alerted the authorities, you are also committing an offense.
Right,
Because the act of storing is also an offense.
So you either delete, get rid of, or pass it on to the authorities the way
You really
you
should
should.
first pass
Right.
it on to the authorities. You really
Right,
should.
right,
Yeah.
right. Section 15 addresses intimidating and threatening acts. Can you explain that a little bit for us?
Yes. Now, as I mentioned, Section 12 targets specifically revenge porn. And this one is particularly important, as you mentioned, Dr. Barnett, when it comes to women and girls, because we know that they are disproportionately affected in this way because we
Right.
are, I mean, our sexuality is always used as a means of, as an avenue to demean us. But when it comes to Section 15, it deals with cyberbullying, in fact, more broadly. So when we look at Section 15, we see how perhaps even it is something that would be in the interest of students. It would be in the interest of a lot of public figures. It would be in the interest of persons more broadly when it comes to becoming the target of people that have certain intents. And
Right.
when we look at it, it deals with criminalizing, on the one hand, the focusing on the nature of the information that is shared.
Right.
So for instance, offensive, vulgar, false, private information that is shared for the purposes of extortion, for the purposes of causing this person to be ridiculed in public, for the
Right.
purpose of coercing them into an act that they want to do or not want to do, to humiliate them.
Right.
So that is what Section 15 deals with very broadly.
So it's threatening to publish your information is what we're talking about. You may have private and personal information, and if you threaten somebody that if you don't do X, Y, Z, I will publish your information, that is now a crime.
Yes,
That is now a
also
crime.
extortion,
Right.
but also sharing it. So it's not, it encompasses both.
Okay.
Yes, because it's coercion and also extortion, and also publishing this type of information for the purpose of humiliating. So a lot of persons would ask, okay, so if I just publish something that is not liked by somebody else, or the section is not as broad. It has to come in within one of the, it has to be shared or published for the purpose of one of the prohibited aims under the legislation.
Right.
Because remember, we always have to balance these types of restrictions with the right to freedom of expression.
Exactly.
So you have to come in within that frame.
Right. So it's the intent to demean, intent to cause harm that's really important in this. Enforcement of laws too often in Belize have proven to be challenging. What will it take to prove these offenses what is the process for reporting and collecting the evidence? Because many times that's where cases fall short, the collection and what will it take to enforce this law?
Well, I think because it falls under the penal law, you will follow the same procedures that you follow for reporting a criminal offense under the criminal code, which is the police, right? You need to go to the police. But because it's also something that you can take screenshots of, you have a little bit more control as to you being able, especially as the victim, being able to have some control as to the nature of the conversations. It's a lot, it's very much interactive. So it's somebody sending you messages consistently to humiliate you, to get you to do something. So you would be able to have these information. So once you start feeling that somebody's harassing you, I would always say to take screenshots so that you can show that to the police officers. Also, that there's something very important that was created under the legislation, which is the ability for the Office of the DPP and the police department to get a storage direction from the court, which now empowers officers to also go into somebody's computer system to try to get the evidence as to whether it has been stored, whether it has been transmitted, and the source of the information.
So I'm understanding then that the justice system, the police, will be able to get search warrants, for example, to go look at somebody's computer because they feel that this is where the information of illegal activity may be stored.
Yes, and specifically a type of warrant, a type of search warrant that is called now a storage direction. It's kind of now modified to address the cyber aspect of it, or the electronic aspect of it, as for you to be able to search in somebody's computer system.
Or their phone, or their tablet, or their whatever form of electronic equipment they're using to transmit this illegal
perhaps it's important to highlight that when persons go and read the legislation and it says computer system, it's not restricted only to a computer. Under the interpretation section, which is section 2, computer system is defined, and if you look at it, it's very broad. It includes tablets, like you mentioned. It includes computers. It includes smartphones. So it includes all of these things.
Right. Okay, thank you very much, Leslie. We have come to the end of this segment. Do you have any final words on this topic for our viewers?
Well, I think that what I would say is that it's if we want to actually address what is happening and be faithful to the outrage that we had every time we hear an incident, particularly when it comes to revenge porn, particularly when it comes to this type of cyberbullying that we see causes serious harms to persons' mental and physical health. I think that we should make an effort to be aware and to also take the legislation seriously and follow through. What I mean by that is that when we get these types of images, report it. I understand that it's not always on you, and there's a certain, I guess, maybe like a lack of confidence in the follow through from perhaps the police department. But I think that the police department cannot act if they don't have a report and if they don't have persons coming forward and assisting. So I think that we should also take that into consideration if we want to change the culture, because the legislation is only one part of it. The legislation also signals to us as a society that this is not something that we want to blame the victim about. We want to actually put the blame on the perpetrator. To respect dignity. And so if we want to have that cultural change, then we kind of also need to ourselves be enforcing and implementing the legislation.
Exactly. In order to make it unacceptable anywhere for this to be done to and happen to anybody, we have to act. We cannot sit back and have it continue and not say and not follow through and not report, and not, as Chantel pointed out, the importance of supporting that supportive environment of families and friends. That's really very important to help victims once they decide that they want to make an official complaint. They will need to have that support coming from their friends and family.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Leslie, for taking the time to enlighten us on this very important law. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, too. All the best.
Viewers, we will take a short break and be right back with more guests who will share with us what their organization is trying to do to address the myriad of issues that affect women. Viewers, thank you for staying tuned into the conversation. I am Carla Barnett. If you are just joining us tonight, we are having a conversation about cyberbullying and the impact on women specifically. We have discussed what cyberbullying is, and we got some insight on the Cybercrimes Act, which was passed into law last October. Now we will hear how women are moving from talk to action. To that end, I am pleased to welcome two women from CIWIL, the Caribbean Women in Leadership Organization, the Belize chapter. Welcome to the show, Dr. Charmaine Saunders, Chair of CIWIL, and Senator the Honorable Valerie Woods, Speaker of the House, who is also a part of CIWIL. It is my wonderful pleasure to have both of you with us. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Carla Barnett.
Thank you for inviting us.
My pleasure entirely. Dr. Saunders, let me start by asking you to tell us a little bit about CIWIL. What is this organization all about? What is its mandate?
So CIWIL is a regional organization, and we really, the focus of the organization is really to promote the women's increased participation in leadership and decision-making in politics and public life, civil society and private sector. It is a regional organization, and we proudly boast that we have formed our Belize chapter. We recently formed that chapter in late November. So we're so proud and happy that we are able to join this movement.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Can you tell us a little bit about its membership and how I know it's new. I'm a part of it in the interest of total transparency. I'm a part of it. But tell us a little bit about its membership and how you operate.
Well, initially, we started with a group of founding members, a very small group. Dr. Barnett, you and I were in that earlier initial group. And we moved across, I would say, across the country. And we encourage women, and we continue to do the encouragement of women to join us. When we moved to formalize the chapter and do elections for our executive positions, we stood at a total of 148 women who had expressed interest. Of course, that evolved, and I think we have about 107 women who have completed their application, and we're now in the process of, we formed our committees that will work on specific area, and now we are, gradually evolving and developing the terms of reference for these committees, but we still continue to market and promote the organization and invite to join.
Right. So it's a new organization, and it's developing its way of working and encouraging more women to become involved. Madam Speaker, Valerie Woods, you are a member of CIWIL, and you were also one of the moving forces in getting CIWIL to come alive in Belize. Can you share with us why you felt this was an important thing for you to do?
Absolutely, and I should also add that the membership is Belizeans both living in Belize as well as Belizeans women living outside, living abroad,
Right.
And we have a healthy amount of our Belizean women in diaspora as members of CIWIL. So CIWIL, a movement of women of diverse backgrounds, whether that be urban, rural, whether that be ethnicity, whether that be in terms of education, in terms of sexuality, in terms of political background. Despite where we may have disagreements, we definitely have things that are in common.
Right.
as a woman that we all face. The very topic that you're having today on the conversation, that of cyberbullying, impacts all women, regardless of age, ability, regardless of rural or urban, sexuality, political background. We've all been touched by it in one shape or form. And so instead of focusing, which we tend to do, human nature, on what we don't like about each other or what divides us, CWIL, looking at how it was incorporated a couple of years ago in the region and being established now in Belize, what it has done is provided that platform that allows us to do more solution-oriented approaches to things and to focus more on what it is that we do agree on and to try and stay focused on that part so that we go from words and all these platitudes to actual implementation.
To action.
Expecting change, exactly.
Exactly. So we're moving from words to action, and we're across political colors, we're across the country, we are across ethnicities, we're a very diverse group of women. And so let me ask you, who should want to be a member of CWIL? And I ask because the organization's name is Women in Leadership. Do you have to already be a woman in a leadership role? And what does it mean? What levels of leadership are we talking about here?
So we want to encourage women at any level of leadership. We're trying to make CWIL a household brand, household name. And we have women who in their own realms are leaders in church leadership, in community, environmental work, it doesn't matter. And I know initially when we started, we had a couple women who were saying, I'm just merely a housewife, when we were trying to establish the organization. But that does not signify that you're not a leader in your own right. You are leading.
Exactly.
We do not want, I want to demystify that it has to be a woman of stature or recognized by the community. And yes, in truth, I always say we're a box of crayon. We're a vibrant set of women. Last week I joked and said we have some firebrand women in the organization. Some of us members, but no, we let's just demystify. It does not mean you have to be a leader in title or recognized in our society.
Right.
Our women are doing good work. They're doing it behind the scenes, but they're leaders in their own realm. And we want to encourage women who are interested in promoting strategies to enable us to participate equally in leadership to join our organization.
Exactly. So women leaders at the community level, village level, at various parts of the city, the country, can join. And the idea being we want to encourage all women to feel that they can become who they are naturally as leaders at whatever level that they are.
Tonight, and young women too.
Absolutely. And we should point out that the executive of CWIL has young women and older women, and because that's what it is. It's intergenerational. It's making sure that everybody has a place to play their role. Tonight, though, we're talking about cyberbullying. What role can CWIL play in helping to protect women and girls from cyberbullying, or helping them to manage this situation if and when they become victims? I recall that in the lead up, for example, to the recent municipal elections, there was at least one instance that we became aware of where one young candidate was the victim of cyberbullying, which many people called out for what it was. What did CWIL do? How can the organization help us to respond to these things again in the future?
Well, our stance, and we stood in solidarity with the women who were vying for municipal elections. We gathered we sent out letters of invitation to all candidates, for independent candidates and those associated with the major political parties. And we invited them to participate in a solidarity video, and we ran that for a while, saying that we were against cyberbullying. It was not fair to women who entered into politics. And we actually had a very young member, she's now a member of CWIL, who was attacked during campaigning. And so our mandate was to ensure that, we recognize that cyberbullying was an attempt to malign the character of these candidates who bravely put themselves up for election, and it was not conducive. The environment is not nurturing for the women, and in fact, it was discouraging the women who wanted to get into this type of politics. And not only that, the focus too was that I think this year around, we saw a very large, well, for us, it was a large number of female candidates.
Yes.
That was historic, not only for our CWIL organization, but for our country, and it spoke volumes to the national development. We want to be a part of nurturing and fostering and encouraging women to participate at that level. And these counterproductive actions, it serves no good for us.
Exactly. And if I might just add to that, in the particular instance recently, it was a coming together of women across the political aisles to say this really ought not to be done. This is, and so there's a certain unity that we formed to demonstrate that, in fact, when these things happen, this is above politics. This is really above the role, the place, and the ability of women to play their rightful role if they wish to become involved in public political life. As women in public life, especially for you, Madam Speaker, a woman in public political life, you would have been the subject of attacks in social media. I have been. How do you react to that?
That's unfortunate. The unfortunate reality, I think, that we still, and many other countries, but that Belize still has to grapple with any young woman or any woman attempting to make that courageous move. And these attacks that come after you, not based on substance of what your policies or positions are, which can be a healthy debate. But it's not that's occurring. What's occurring is, quite frankly, the gender bias, and you're taking my sexuality and you are attacking me because of my sexuality. It doesn't happen to men. I'm very excited, as both of you know, as members of CWIL, that we remain strong with those numbers that Charmaine, the president, just mentioned, because we have sustained it since the early stages in November when we first got started. And if anybody knows anything in Belize, the easiest thing to do
is to join.
Is to just destroy something that starts to get this momentum. And worse, if it gets one with the diversity of the political views involved, because Belize is so politically charged. And I have to take my hats off to all the women in CWIL who recognize that and have been very upfront, even though sometimes it may get a very, tense in some of the conversations, but have maintained a level of respect that I will be biased here, that quite frankly, I think some of the male counterparts could certainly take a lesson from. Another, you asked earlier, and I want to just quickly add to what the president said, he will also contribute to this discussion on cyberbullying by just most recently, just over the weekend, having had a webinar with its members, inviting the original authors, if you will, and drivers behind the Cyberbullying Act that Attorney Leslie Mendez just referred to in your earlier segment, as well as hearing from the police authority on the matter, that of the police officer, ACP Bart Jones.
Bart Jones, yes, he participated with us.
And gave some really practical realities of where the act is in terms of its being used, the road ahead in terms of the awareness needed to get out there about the act, and also recognizing that the Crime Observatory now we now have to ensure that it recognizes and picks up those types of criminal activities occurring on the cyberbullying end.
Yes, that really was a very important session that we had internally for Civil, because we understood that in order to be able to represent, in order to be able to advocate, we internally need to understand what all of this meant. And so we had that really nice session with the police, through Bart Jones, and with Kim Simplis Barrow, who was one of the proponents of the legislation when it was being put together. And it was really an interesting
informative,
very informative that we did. So let me ask you, Madam Speaker, you and I have talked about this a little bit privately. Can there be a special role for women in Parliament, members of the House, members of the Senate, in terms of getting these kinds of issues addressed through law, through strengthening the environment? Is there a special role that we can expect or we can ask women in Parliament, both houses, to be involved in?
Well, I would like to think so. You may recall when I served as an opposition senator that I had reached out to members of the women in the Senate across the aisle, as well as the women in the House. At the time, it was only two. And we managed to convene at least one meeting to get the conversation going. That because I do believe in cross-party caucuses. I do believe there's a power in that, and especially women cross-party caucuses, and joint ones at that includes both the chambers, because the reality of the gender bias is real, and the lack of attention to it, because we are so few in number, is obviously glaring. You specifically asked, and forgive me, I don't think I answered you directly. How did I deal with my stint in electoral politics with some of the attacks I got? You know, I listened to your segment with Miss Magdaleno, and it is so important that you identify your genuine support base that can hold your hand through some of what you're dealing with. Some women leaders may look, as Charmaine mentioned, bold moves, right? All these women that stepped up recently for the municipal elections. None of us know what they're going through when the camera is off. None of us understand when they go home what the emotions they have gone through from the campaign trail, from the attack within party and outside of party. And so it's so important, and I'm glad that Ms. Magdaleno mentioned that she was able to take solace and some comfort in that best friend of hers and her other support network, which is imperative, I think, for every young girl and woman to have. Whether it's one or two. And Civil, in its very nature of what it is intended to be a broad support for women in that regard. We're not necessarily related as family, but we are a wider sisterhood to bring that support.
Bring that support and help.
At the end of the day,
absolutely,
it is what is needed to withstand and be resilient to the attacks. My time, and I've said this openly, and I can't tell you I enjoyed it. I would never say I enjoyed my time with that stint there.
I know.
But I am certainly, I don't regret it. It has been such a tremendous experience for me. But honestly, I think one that makes any woman resilient. And listening to Miss Magdaleno, she's stronger for it.
She is,
she's more
absolutely.
Resilient.
She's
such a voice of inspiration to so many other women. 10 years later, imagine that. 10 years later, when it's so much more rampant, her strength that she got because of what she went through is something that is empowering. And
absolutely.
That's the essence of having support to get you through something. So I'm grateful for my family's support when I went through it myself.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Ladies, thank you very much for this very enlightening discussion. We do look forward to Civil becoming an effective force in helping to strengthen the number of women involved in leadership at all levels. Getting that critical mass, that number of women in positions of political power is really very important. I don't know that people understand how important that is. But when issues like cyberbullying are on the table, and effectively keeping women out of putting themselves into positions of leadership, it really becomes important for us to have good and effective ways of dealing with it. The larger number of women in leadership that we have, the better we will be able to put in place critical laws and policies that can protect women and that can have the desired effect. So thank you very much. Any final words?
I just want to add that definitely, if we focus on commonalities and our main goal, which is to increase the participation, we will stand in unity and solidarity, and we could get more done. Yes,
we can. Yes,
but that's beside the point that we want to do. And in truth, I would like to see more women willing and able to participate at varying levels, but we can only do this if they have a strong support system. We can't lament on we don't need to go through this, why are we going through this? It's really now putting things into action, putting it into motion, so that, I have a daughter at 17 years old, excited, vibrant, ready to move mountains, and we don't want these younger generation to be discouraged by, I heard Valerie say 10 years later, but we have an opportunity to be the 10 years later, to make that difference. And we got to grab the bull by the horn.
Yes, thank you very much. Final words, Madam Speaker?
Yeah, very briefly, we need to have more women in leadership, whether that's political, private sector, community, at whatever level. And how do we do that? We got to recruit more women in these positions. We have to support them when they step up, and we have to elect them into politics. We're not going to have a house with more women if we don't elect the women who are running to get into that house. And
absolutely. And just to be clear, that is across parties, across the country. Absolutely. We now take the final break, and we'll come back with the final segment of the conversation for tonight. Welcome back to the final segment of the conversation for tonight. It is no secret that cyberbullying has been one of the unfortunate downsides of the digital age in which we find ourselves. While technology exists for us to be able to share our ideas far and wide in a snap second, there are those who have tapped into this tool to broadcast their idleness, hatred, and basic criminality at the expense of others. The effect of their actions include humiliation, emotional anguish, mental health challenges, and even lives lost to suicide. Slowly, our country is making efforts to formulate legislation that reflects the needs of the time, and civil society, academic institutions, and individual efforts are combining to lead private responses to this very public issue. The onus, though, is on all of us who are a part of the virtual community. We can call out the cyberbullies. We can challenge them, report them, leave them isolated. We must also ensure not to multiply their criminality. Don't share, repost, or store what they broadcast. Don't request that others share with you media that is intended to hurt or offend others. And of course, do not engage in the activities where you yourself could be considered a cyberbully. Change starts with each of us. With that, our time is up for tonight. Remember to join us on Mondays at 7 p.m. for new episodes of The Conversation right here on CBTV and on Colorblind's Facebook page. Until next time, remember, progress starts with the conversation. Good night and take care.